No, I'm Not a Human has a total of 56 different characters, some always human, some always visitors, and others that can be either, depending on the playthrough. Out of the 56, there are a select few that are very interesting, either because they're key to the story, or because keeping them in the house for long enough reveals chilling secrets. These characters' dialogues are very easy to miss, since they require keeping them in the house for several consecutive nights without them being killed, taken by FEMA, or spreading their illness to you. Because yes, most of these characters can be visitors, and in order to uncover their secrets, they must be kept alive despite showing clear signs. In this video, I'll cover each and every secret dialogue with these characters, and uncover the truth about the world of No, I'm Not a Human. As far as we can tell from the news, the sun is about to explode. It is strictly forbidden to go outside during the daytime, and unidentified creatures named visitors that can mimic human appearance have crawled out from under the soil. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, gives the public a list of signs to detect visitors, but can we trust this association that spawned from thin air? Are visitors an alien species, or have the dead come back to life? Why do FEMA wear hazmat suits in the boiling heat? Are visitors infected with a contagious virus? Is the protagonist also sick with this virus? Which guests hide the deepest secrets? The answer to all of these questions is in this video. Before covering the guests though, we'll begin with the host. We play as a middle-aged man who lives alone in an isolated rural area. He's antisocial and doesn't like dealing with people, which is why his neighbors call him the Hermit. The protagonist comes from a humble family that has always lived in the same house. It is evident the family never had many resources. The living room and the bathroom have a shared window to save electricity, and the protagonist only ever had one childhood toy. He was married, but separated from his wife, whose pictures we can see throughout the house. We discover they had a troubled relationship, as he considers he's better off without her, and sleeping by the nightstand brings him bad memories. This isn't the only troubled relationship in the protagonist's life, however. On a phone call with a stranger, he reveals he hated his father and wished death upon him. The truth is, he ended up fulfilling his own wish. Why are we so alone in what has been a family house for generations? If you thought the huge dugout hole in the basement existed only to get the minor ending, you're wrong. This is where the protagonist buried his parents after murdering them. Some guests even hint at this occurrence by claiming that death has a liking to this house, even prior to killing any visitors. On the topic of visitors, is the protagonist one of them? Well, it's up to the player. If the house is clear of visitors, the protagonist preserves his sanity. But if visitors manage to stay in the house for long enough, we begin showing signs until one night, we turn. We kill everyone in the house and have absolutely no memory of it. This reveals two major truths about visitors. The first is that we're clearly dealing with a contagious illness. If we coexist in the same space with visitors for long enough, we become one. The agent of this illness we'll cover later on. The second truth is that most visitors act and then forget. They are a puppet for whatever controls their brain, which also has the capacity to erase memory. The best example of this is the cashier. The cashier is always a visitor. After getting fired from a job, she returns home to find a bunch of men at her house who abused her roommate. The men grab her and sit her down on a chair, keeping watch. During a moment of distraction, she sees her chance and bolts out the front door. She was most likely burnt to a crisp by the sunlight and came back to life as a visitor, though she has no memory of her death whatsoever. Her teeth are white since she says she got them fixed, but she doesn't recall going to the dentist. After having her for a couple days in the home, paranoia gets the best of her and she begins losing her sanity, claiming that she's a visitor. And well, she was right. The researcher is the most important human character in the game. He is the key to the story, the one who holds the truth regarding all this madness. He can even be seen in the opening cutscene. The researcher can easily be mistaken for a madman or a crazy scientist, but if we hear him out, we begin to connect the dots. The researcher got fired from his job for claiming that the visitors have a brain parasite that enters the host through their ears. We hear on the radio that all of his documents were destroyed or stolen. Now, I don't know about you, but when someone gets fired from their job and all their work is destroyed, it's usually a sign that they know too much. If we pay attention to the TV, we can catch an unofficial broadcast, clearly made by visitors, that confirms the researcher's theory. Afterwards, we're given the option to examine our guests' ears, always to their surprise, since they don't recall FEMA announcing the ears should be checked. Furthermore, if we call FEMA and ask them about the ear sign, they give us no answer. The researcher explains that FEMA is run by visitors, which is why they spread misinformation and establish very vague and common symptoms. According to him, these fake symptoms are just a tool so that humans kill each other off, and the population can be reduced. It is also clear now that FEMA don't wear hazmat suits to protect them from the sun. FEMA knew from the start that they were dealing with a parasite, but refused to inform the public. The researcher's theory could seem a bit far-fetched. That is, if it weren't backed up by other characters. Throughout the game, we come into contact with two men who manage to escape the FEMA quarantine zone. According to one of them, the QZ is a big, fenced-off parking lot area with tents and shipping containers where they put all the survivors. We soon discover that the QZ is in reality a visitor factory. Everyone who enters dies, and eventually turns.
They didn't have mirrors in those FEMA pens. No one needs to watch themselves turn into livestock. There was this poor fucker in the pens who kept scratching, until he stopped.
The man is clearly talking about people turning into visitors inside the quarantine zone. So, if what the researcher said is true, and visitors are infected with a brain parasite that enters the host through the ears, anybody who has been to the QZ has to show evident signs.
They say if you live in silence long enough, you start hearing things. We find that out back in the pens.
The researcher was right all along. The things that he is hearing are caused by the parasite in his brain. When the parasite fully takes over, the host becomes completely aware that they are a visitor and has no issue with threatening us when we point our gun at them. After all, they know they are immortal. A great example of this is Big Momma. Big Momma is a visitor infected with a parasite that has reached the stage of total control. It doesn't take many days of keeping her in the house till she confesses that her children are visitors that will crawl out from under the ground and come for the protagonist. The game gives us no option but to shoot her. If you thought this was the final stage of the parasite, boy are you wrong. This disturbing sight we receive on night 12 is our first contact with the entity. After seeing it, we receive an achievement for witnessing horrors beyond our comprehension. During the first week of the apocalypse, the FEMA quarantine zone suffers a brutal attack with thousands of casualties. The news claim it was carried out by a maniac with a rifle, but eyewitnesses assure that whatever caused all of that destruction wasn't human. The entity feeds on the charred bodies left behind by the burning sun. This could be the reason why the temperatures have increased so drastically. Is this entity some sort of god who can control the sun and adjust it to its advantage? FEMA catches on to this fact quickly, strictly forbidding their employees from burning any more corpses. Throughout the game, we meet a group of cultists that worship death. These are the same cultists who later tie themselves to poles in front of the house and willingly burn in the daylight heat, offering themselves as food for the entity. It is very possible that the horror we witness outside of our window was death itself. This is further reinforced by the miner we find under the house, who has discovered a hole where the visitors apparently come from. After jumping down it, our theory is confirmed. The entity that awaits us is none other than death. Another plausible theory is that neither the miner or the underground tunnel system actually exist, and when the protagonist enters the basement, he takes his own life, hence why he meets death. So, is this the next stage of the infection? After becoming fully controlled by the parasite, does the victim begin to be consumed by this entity? This next character gives us the answer. One night, this genderless visitor comes to our door, dressed in winter clothing despite the unbearable heat outside. They refuse to take off their jacket and claim they have a secret they want to share. After letting them crash for a few nights, they finally reveal the reason as to why they're so cold all the time. It's curious how this is one of the few characters in the game that's neither a he or a she. It is something else, something that is in a very advanced stage of possession, something that we cannot comprehend. Everything points toward the fact that this person is being consumed by death, as they feel very cold, just like the realm in which death lives. Is this what happens when you come into contact with the entity? We were lucky enough to only catch a brief glimpse of it, but others weren't so fortunate. This poor fellow just so happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, and witnessed the entity in its full horror. Seeing it devour the charred corpses of his fellow citizens left him no other option but to gouge his own eyes out, in hopes to never see such a sight again. Nevertheless, it's too late. The damage has been done. The entity's image is ingrained in his brain and haunts his dreams. Eventually, he himself in the kitchen. For now, let's take a break from the visitors and cover some humans. Our neighbor is a very caring and compassionate man who abandons his family in the middle of an apocalypse to stay over at ours, just so we're not alone. This same compassion is what gets him killed later on. His daughter explains that he let some strange people into the house, who turned out to be visitors that ripped him apart. The daughter, in a panic, runs for shelter to our house. She tells us the whole story, and one very creepy detail. After being attacked and killed by the visitors, her father got back up again. We all know what that means. This isn't the only twisted secret this little girl hides, though. The following day, she gives us the phone number of one of her friend's parents and asks us to call them so that she can come over and play. Upon dialing the number, we're met with a truly horrifying story. The little girl was murdered by her own parents for showing signs of being a visitor. This poor little girl's parents have completely fallen for the FEMA narrative and were so indoctrinated by terror, it led them to kill their own child. Another great example of this is the Vigilante, the neighbor's brother. The Vigilante is always human, but ironically, he poses more of a threat than most visitors. His philosophy is to shoot and kill anybody who shows even one sign. In his words, he's cleaning up the filth. He stops by our house regularly to check us for signs, and will shoot us on sight if something is off. One night he asks about his brother, our neighbor. After we tell him he didn't make it, he expresses great disappointment. Perhaps if he was a little more like himself and did what he had to do, his family would still be alive. The Vigilante is a perfect manifestation of FEMA's brainwashing. He follows the signs he hears on TV religiously and is completely driven by paranoia, turning him into a serial killer, cutting down the number of human survivors daily. One night we encounter a man dressed in a yellow hazmat suit, but without a gas mask. Our first instinct, of course, is to ask if he's with FEMA. He claims he isn't, that he got the suit from a dead body. However, the man seems to be caught up in his own lies. First, he says he does coding, then he says that he fixes fridges, and later on he says he has to deal with people all day, indicating that he most likely did work for FEMA. Eventually, we search his pockets and find his FEMA ID. The man confesses that he lied because he knew no one in their right mind would allow a FEMA employee into their home. He explains that he got fired from his job for breaking protocol. One day, a woman came to the quarantine zone to check up on her husband. After they informed her that he was dead, the woman requested to be given the body, but the request was strictly refused. In response, the woman camped outside the quarantine zone for days, until this man, along with his team, broke protocol and handed her the body, costing him his job. A woman that carries the dead body of a man sounds familiar, doesn't it? This same woman also ends up at the house, severely sleep deprived and looking for a place to rest. Now, if we know anything about the QZ, we know that the husband is 100% infected with the parasite and will most likely turn into a visitor soon. We also know that this illness is contagious, meaning that even though the widow is always human, she will start showing symptoms soon, and if we keep her around for long enough, so will we. These are, in my opinion, the key characters that best reveal the lore of the game through their interactions. However, there are more guests that hide unusual secrets, and although they're not key to the story, I believe they're still worth covering. This teacher is in great emotional distress after her classroom was burnt down with some of her students inside. She reveals the fire was lit intentionally because the kids were showing signs of being visitors. This event scars the poor woman so much that one day she yanks your shotgun from you and ends her own life. Once she stayed in the house long enough, if you attempt to shoot the ballerina, she will show you her dance moves, dodging your first 3 shots until you can finally kill her. The married couple hide a dark secret. I say the word couple very lightly, since it could very well be that this man, who is clearly abusive, kidnapped a random lady and uses her as an excuse to get into people's homes. The woman does not dare utter a word throughout the whole dialogue, out of fear of the man, who threatens her and accuses her of taking too long to get ready and leave. He then moves on to threatening the protagonist, claiming he also has a gun. If we don't shoot, the couple leaves the house in broad daylight, wrapped in a blanket that clearly doesn't offer them much protection. They collapse after a couple steps outside, roasted by the solar flares. I'd also like to point out how a lot of the characters are interconnected and have met in the past. When hearing some of the anecdotes the characters have to offer, we realize they are speaking about a person we've already met before, or we will meet in the future. Here are a couple curious examples. This cab driver appears to be linked to a multitude of characters. He tells us his father also used to be a cabbie, and one time, after refusing to offer a suited man a ride, was brutally beaten. The suited man later appears at our house and tells us the exact same story. It is also possible that the cab driver is the one responsible for running over this man's dog. A curious fact about this man is that he later reveals he had to kill the dog himself in order to end its suffering. And lastly, this cab driver could also be the same one that drove the FEMA officer's wife to the outskirts, as she mentioned taking a cab to our area and also getting charged a fortune for it. This woman also happens to be the neighbor of the wounded man who escaped the QZ. He tells us how they always hated each other, and she ended up ratting him out to FEMA, which is what caused him to end up in the quarantine zone. The woman also has no issues with confessing this. If anything, she feels proud to have sent someone to their demise. Luckily for the wounded man, a doctor at the QZ falsified his report, claiming he was clean, and granting him his freedom. The doctor that did this is no other than the one that also knocks on our door. He tells us he began falsifying reports because he felt the symptoms announced by FEMA had no basis. In that, he is very correct. Other guests claim that FEMA is actually responsible for the catastrophe and are now trying to fix the mess that they created. This man may very possibly be right, since we find out that FEMA existed before the apocalypse. The FEMA hotline is the only number that doesn't vary from game to game. If we call this number before the consolidation of FEMA is even announced on TV, a woman picks up the phone and is instantly cut off by an angry-sounding man who makes her hang up immediately. Another interesting theory is that this man might be the minister we meet later on. Upon conversing with him, we find out that he was involved in the consolidation of FEMA, but for some reason, he clearly isn't working with them anymore. Could this slip-up have gotten him fired? A dialogue with the scavenger reveals that one time, as he was searching an abandoned house for resources, he encountered the body of a man, full of bullet holes. Under the man was the body of his little daughter, who also met the same fate. This story is very similar to the one the man in the bandana tells us. We discover he witnessed a maniac kill a child and their parents before his eyes. Though the situation is similar, it is true that the scavenger found the bodies in a house, and the man in the bandana said this happened in an alleyway. But perhaps the correlation between these two stories is not the victims, but the shooter. All in all, after 50 hours invested in this game and all of the achievements unlocked, these are all the most interesting secrets I could find, though I'm certain there might be some I've missed. If you have any counter theories or discoveries to add, I would love to read them in the comment section. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.